Hey everyone, it's Jen B, and welcome to my studio. In this video, I had a fun idea where I thought I would take some of my scrap metal from other projects and make a new project. So you can see here I've got a little tray of scrap metal. I've picked out a couple pieces of metal, some brass and some sterling, and I'm going to make a pendant out of it. So my idea is to take this little cup of brass and solder it to some rectangle wire. It won't stay up because there's not a flat spot on it yet. And then put another piece of sterling inside the cup. I had initially chosen this decorative ball, but I just really didn't like it. So I chose just a plain sterling ball, and I liked that much better. That looks perfect to me. Alright, so there's the main components, so let's get started on this. First thing I do is flatten out one end of the wire. Since this is just a fun project, I am not being really precise. There's no reason to be super duper precise here. I straightened out that wire, filed one of the edges, and now I am filing a flat spot on the brass cup so that it can sit perfectly on the rectangle wire, just like that. And now I'm getting set up at my soldering area, putting a little piece of solder on the soldering board, which is a charcoal block in this instance. And here in a moment, I'm going to show you that I got some new torch heads, and I'm going to be trying them out today. Getting my torch lit, the gas is on, and then I'm going to add the oxygen to get just the perfect flame, and we'll start heating this up. Here in just a moment, something happens with this pendant that isn't the end of the world. It's a good reminder that different areas, depending on the thickness of wire, the type of metal it is, can heat up at different rates than the rest of the piece. And solder always flows to the area where it is the hottest. And so in this instance, the rectangle wire is a lot thinner than the brass cup, and so that rectangle wire gets heated up very quickly. And here, in just a moment, the solder is going to flow to the top of that rectangle wire instead of getting pooled underneath that rectangle wire and attaching it to the brass cup. So I'm going to quench it to separate my pieces, and then I'll get it set up again, but this time I'll just turn that rectangle wire over so that the solder that's now on the rectangle wire is touching the brass cup. And so I will get it heated up again, spray it with flux again, and I'm going to be more mindful of my flame control, my temperature control here, and try to make sure that the piece heats up in a way that that rectangle wire is not going to heat up before the brass. So you can see me kind of going around the outsides, just trying to touch the brass. And then once it's all about right, that solder flows right there, and I'm just pulling it through the other side, and everything's perfect. Or is it? Let's see what happened here. I did not have the rectangle wire in the middle of the brass cup. So I have to get that solder to flow again and try to nudge that rectangle wire over just a little bit so that it is sitting in the middle of the brass cup. Things don't always go perfectly 100% of the time. It's just the nature of the beast. It just happens. Alright, so I'm bringing everything up to temperature, and I'm just going to ever so carefully nudge that piece of rectangle wire. Right there, it gets nudged into place. Yay! Now we're all good. Hip hip hooray! Much, much better, don't you think? Alright, one other thing happened here. Not a big deal. you can see that the brass cup got tilted forward a little bit. But I decided, you know what, this is just a fun project, and I'm gonna go with it. And I'm gonna call that a design feature instead of a flaw. Now I'm just taking that ball of silver and using some old pliers to file a flat spot on the back of the ball. And then I'm going to flood the back of the ball with some solder that will eventually get pulled from the bottom of the ball to the outside of it and attach it to the brass cup. So here I'm putting down my pieces of solder. I'm going to grab a pick and I'm going to get that solder melted and then do a very delicate dance with my torch and my pick to spread that solder to the edges. You can see me doing that there. Okay, we're good there. And so now I'm going to solder that ball into the brass cup. This is pretty straightforward. I'm just spraying things with flux, getting everything up to temperature. I do have some titanium squares, just kind of propping it up so that it doesn't tilt when I'm soldering this ball down. Everything's getting up to temperature, and I'm trying to pull that solder all the way around the ball. And now we're going to start working on getting the bail ready. I've got a little tiny jump ring and an even tinier piece of solder. And I'm going to get that solder attached to the jump ring and then the jump ring to the pendant. Right here, that piece of solder was not in contact with the jump ring, and so it was not flowing onto the jump ring. So I nudged it into place, and then there you can see the solder jumped to that ring. And I just push it over and get it in line with the pendant. Flame and heat control is going to play a huge part right here, getting that jump ring soldered to the pendant, because that ring is tiny and it will melt lickety-split. So I have to make sure that I focus my flame on the bulk of the pendant and not on the jump ring. So you can see me here trying to warm up the entire piece, and I am keeping my flame off of that jump ring as much as I can, while also making sure that it's getting warmed up so that the solder can flow from the jump ring to the pendant. Here in just a moment, I nudge it ever so slightly with my pick, just making sure that it is perfectly in place. And then the solder is going to flow from the jump ring onto the pendant, right there. Perfect. Easy peasy, right? Maybe, not always. So I'm going to quench this and then show you something that I noticed. I noticed that the solder from the ball only attached on half of the ball. You can see there's no silver solder around the whole ball, so I did go back and fix that. And now I'm going to work on cutting out my bail. The first bail that I did, I melted, and I put that in a little short. So I'm cutting out this little tiny bail and really having a difficult time trying to make sure that you guys can see what I'm doing. I'm definitely going to have to work with camera angles and stuff for little tiny pieces like this, but I do eventually get that little tiny bail cut out. And again, this is using all scrap metal. Okay, so now I'm using some bail making pliers and another pair of pliers to help form the bail. And again, I have said that I have some hand issues, and that's why I'm using a pair of parallel pliers to help me bend the wire around the bail making pliers. So once that looks good, I'm going to file the edges and just refine the shape of the bail. Now, I did melt the first bail when I was trying to solder it to the pendant, so I thought I would try a different technique of attaching the bail and pin it to the pendant instead of soldering it.
You look okay.
So here, I'm going to drill some holes to put the pin in, and I do slip right there. So a cautionary tale, be very, very careful when you are drilling holes. So I'll drill the second hole, and then over at my soldering area, I got a piece of scrap metal. Oh, I guess right here I am just refining the top and taking out any little scratches that may have appeared from cutting and refining the bail. And then over at my soldering area, I've already balled up some sterling wire, and I've put it through the bail and the pendant, and then I'm balling up the other end to pin it in place. And there it is, and I don't know why this clip came out a little fuzzy. Oh well. Okay, so now I'm going to do some cleanup and polishing before I do the final patina on this piece. So I'm taking, this is like a sanding roll. It's sandpaper on a roll that I put in my flex shaft. And I am just cleaning up any excess solder that's on the brass cup. So just going around, sorry, my hands are in the way. Again, I've got to work on camera angles. On the back, I'm also cleaning up any excess solder on the brass. And then I use some radial disc brushes to go through and just do the final polishing. I could have tumbled this, but the patina that I use, which is liver-o-sulfur, doesn't patina brass very well. So I just used a tiny bit of patina on the sterling ball in the middle and left everything else kind of a flat matte, or I should say that I left the silver kind of a flat matte and polished up the brass so that there was some contrast between the silver and the brass and that dark ball in the center. So I love it. It was so fun to take some scrap and make it into something wearable and fun. So I hope you enjoyed joining me as I made this pendant. Here's one last look at it, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.